Okay, we're coming back on here live again. Let me say one thing about this chart. We're going to get into this chart next week. Next week is the letter K. The letter K is a mouth. And the thing about a mouth is that it also means everything that you think of regarding a mouth, which is speak, pray, sing, breathe. And being a mouth, it also has to do with speaking, so it's words. And I mentioned this chart months ago. At the very beginning of the class, I mentioned that this chart was in the works. And I just got this back this morning. This thing has been working on this at least probably almost a couple of years. It's a lot of work. I'll explain this next week more, and we'll have copies for people. If you want a copy, we got to print them. And just for what this is worth, I mean, I got to give the lady who typeset this. It's probably worth like $500 or $600. Just computer time for making it. I mean, this is expensive stuff. And we haven't paid her yet. We paid her somewhere, maybe half of it or something. But, this stuff that we're doing is costing a lot of money. I just want to let you know, this represents hundreds of hours worth of time trying to research this. But just like what I was saying about Lou White's book, where he has, instead of an Ayin being an equivalent of Omicron, he has the equivalent of Omega. This stuff takes a lot of work, and there might be mistakes here and there. So don't take my word for it like I'm the expert and everything I say is 100%. You guys better double check this stuff. I've just gone over this and gone over it, and I think I've pretty well clarified it. But just to show you what this is, just to show you what this is doing, because remember the Ayin has to do with understanding. Samik, Ayin, Pei work in the triad together. So in the other chart, which is not on this chart, just for what it's worth, we had this chart printed up, and I had an empty space down here. And that empty space on the chart was so that people could write their own notes. Well, I've made a revised version of the chart, and it's going to cost more to make the revision stickers than it does to even print these things. But I made another chart which we have available as a bookmarker. It's this. I made this first, kind of like a Rosetta Stone, where you can see the modern letters, the Sophi letters, the Paleo letters, and the Mishkan pattern. And I thought, oh, this is self-explanatory. Everybody can see this perfectly well. Nobody knew what I was saying. So I made this chart. Nobody knows what I'm saying about that. So then I made all these other charts. Now we're doing this DVD thing, hopefully, to say, a picture speaks 1,000 words. This ought to be worth a few million here. The point is, Samik, Ayin, Pei are in this blue triangle. The blue triangle is shaped like a Dallas. You might say, gee, what's the message there? Samik, Ayin, Pei. They're in this 7-part place, the Kadosh place. Samik, Ayin, Pei, motoring. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your Elohim. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your Elohim. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your Elohim. How do you walk humbly with your Elohim? You do justice and mercy as you keep the Shabbat and the festivals. How do you do justly? You remember that whatever you do is going to come back around. That's the scales of the Ayin. And remember, whatever you do, you're supposed to be walking with Yahweh, and if you're not producing good fruit, He's going to break you off and throw you into the burn pile. Again, we mentioned last week that I think that maybe the message of the 7 stars in his hand, the word star, if you look up in the dictionary, is kakav, which means like a fire extinguisher, like a fireman, which means your fire can be put out. Don't be too sure. Your fire can be put out. Now, there's this whole thing about, hey, we're supposed to have confidence, but Yeshua's message in the book of Revelation is, don't be too stuck on yourself. Your fire can be put out. So, each one of these 3 finds its reference by the other 2. Love mercy. What does that mean? You're trying to do justly. Give the other guy a break. Remember, what does it mean to love mercy? Does it mean have mercy? I told a story once before. I tell it again because of the position of the Ayin. Me and a friend were outside an office building. The guy pulls up and he's mouthing off. Felt like punching him out. I knew that if another guy was working here, he would have been on his back with a smashed nose because the other guy had no tolerance. And I felt like, I just want to do something to this guy. And I noticed he was parked in the handicap zone doing construction work. I knew the cops were on the other side of the street, the police station in Beaverton. I thought, I can go call the cops on this guy. That'll give him one. And I don't have to say a word or do anything. I'll just call the cops and get him busted. And then this verse came up. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. In other words, why is what's happening to you in your life right now happening? Is it because of what you did yesterday? What you did 10 years ago? What you did when you were a little kid? There was one time when my neighbor had an M80 and he says, hey, let's go blow up somebody's mailbox. And I thought, hey, that sounds like fun. I thought, wait a minute. When I get old enough to have a mailbox, if this is like what comes around goes around multiplied with a harvest, that means I might have to replace my mailbox 50 times. It's not worth it. It's not worth it because I was looking to the future and saying, to blow up one guy's mailbox, I now, in the scrolls of heaven, have set myself up to justifiably receive a multiplied amount of my very behavior. And I've signed off on it. I said, okay, let's have that. My friend didn't have any regard. But I knew better. We were talking about, it was Ezekiel 18, where he says, Yahweh says, if the wicked man changes and starts doing righteousness, none of this wickedness will be remembered. And if the righteous man changes his behavior and starts doing wickedness, none of his righteousness will be remembered. Those are dire words. You can spend 50 years doing righteousness and say, what the heck? I don't even know if it's worth it. I'm going to cut loose and party. It's like, midlife crisis? Sign it off as any excuse you want. You will pay. The judge is watching. And we might think, oh, God's going to get you. I'm not saying God's going to get you. What I'm saying is that Yahweh Elohim, the creator of heaven and earth, created a system. And he put our own devices as the orchestration of that system. What we do is what comes back around. So the other interesting thing, well, here, let me finish talking about this. You got the Samic IRA in the blue triangle, blue like the ZT thread. And, excuse me a second, this thing is behind me and I'm not bumping it, so I don't know if we're getting auditory feedback here. There's noise here. I'll try to not move very much.
No, I think what he needs you to do is put it up front because it's not getting the signal.
It's not getting the signal.
Let's put it up front.
Tell you what, I'm going to hold it. Here's that. How's that? Does that help? That's not going to help? It's on green. Well, before I sit down on the computer. Something's clicking. I don't know what that would be. I'm not even moving them here quick. It's not me. I didn't do it. Anyway, the point is about this. If you take Aleph Bet, it forms a word. That's here. If you take Bet Gimel, that's a word. It's here. If you take Gimel Dalet, that's a word. Dalet Hey, that's a word. Hey Vav, that's a word. So in the blue going this way, these two rows, is the words that are naturally spelled by the sequence of the letters in their organic, unshuffled chronological sequence. And then these top three are three-letter sequences, meaning Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Dalet, Hey, Vav. And then you go from here to Dalet, or Hey, Vav, Zion, Vav, Zion, Ket. I mean, we're running everything into the three-letter sequences. And then this is running them backwards. In other words, if you spell the words Tav Shin, Resh, Shin Resh, Shin Resh Kuf, Resh Zadi, you read these this way. And what I'm suggesting is that if you look at these words, and this is not shuffling the letters, this is just spelling the words in the sequence that they naturally come in. If you message in the flow, Sefer, Cipher, Sonic Resh. If you look at the concepts here, as they move this direction, you'll see that there's a natural message in the words spelled by the alphabet in their natural sequence. The thing about this day 5, this lines up with day 5 of creation. Just for what it's worth, last week was day 4, where Yahweh put the sun, moon, and stars in the sky. We had a book on astronomy and had Jeff Hosker playing the flugelhorn trumpet and showing pictures from the Hubble. Just for what it's worth, I brought some pictures. In day 5, what did he do? Like the scales tipping. See, we're talking about different themes. In the scales tipping, one side's up and the other side's down, right? With the major you use, it comes back and goes around. You'll be held judgment accounted for. This thing's falling. Anyway, the thing is, he put the fish in the sea and the birds in the air. If you want to see some strange-looking creatures, there's a couple fish from the very deep that look like human heads with giant teeth. It's just like a mouth with a fin sticking on top and a little tail. And there's some jellyfish and all sorts of... there's a strange-looking one. I can pass this around if you guys want to look through it. Anyway, and as the other thing, he put the birds in the sky. And so I've got this other book here by Andrew Zuckerman, Bird. And what this guy's done, you can take a look at this later, is that just random pictures, is he's taken, I can't do this, you can look at it. He's just taken very interesting artistic pictures of birds. And you think, form, shape, ingenuity, Yahweh's creativity. This day, the 5th day of creation, he put this fish in the sea, he put the birds in the air. Take a look at some pictures of fish. Take a look at some pictures of birds. Again, what's he up to? Anyway, the other side of this is that on Judgment Day, like the scales again, and I know some people don't like to hear about this, but as the scales tip, you got some going up and some going down, you got the notion of heaven and hell. You know, some people don't like to talk about that. They don't think it's a valid concept. But the picture is that the fish inhabit the depths of the ocean. The birds inhabit the sky. It's an Ayin concept. It's day 5. The 5th festival is Yom Kippur. It's judgment. It's a tipping of scales. Then, if you want to study Ayin concepts, you look all through the scriptures and you'll find different places, like in Zechariah 4, where it says, the eyes of Yahweh flutter about the entire earth. What's he looking for? Looking for a man who has a heart to do righteousness. And even if you were doing wickedness, you can turn and be forgiven. Even if you don't offer a sacrifice of Yom Kippur, there's models of the truth in the alphabetic letters. That's what we're talking about. And like I said before, that in Leviticus 15, there was no sacrifice for volitional sin. I would maintain that I believe that the offer of Yeshua's blood on the cross is the sacrifice for volitional sin. However, some have argued that nowhere in the Torah or in the Tanakh does it ever tell us to have human sacrifice. So why should human sacrifice then be what's demanded for volitional sin? Because he said, the soul that sins, it shall die. But he also says, the sins of the father won't be demanded of the son, nor vice versa, but that soul which sins shall die. But Yeshua was the one, remember somebody came up to him and said, good master. He says, why do you call me good? There's none good but Elohim. Well, the interesting thing, again, about the word good is tov. Let him check off that. Like we said, the full house. The idea is, if he is the good master, the good shepherd, and there's none good but Elohim, someone could construe, oh, he's claiming to be Elohim, or he's claiming to be the equivalent. This all gets into doctrinal debates and midrashing, which is not what we're trying to do here. But I'm just saying that once you start addressing these matters, there's many things you can discuss, many things that you can study, many things you can talk about. But let me show you another one. In the New Testament, Yeshua said something about the law and the prophets were until John the Baptist. It's quoted in both Luke and Matthew, and it says something about that the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take hold of it forcefully or violently. Are you familiar with this verse? It says a very interesting thing. The Torah and the prophets were until John, in reference to John the Baptist. Now, doesn't that make it sound like it's not pertinent any longer? Doesn't that sound like a very good verse for New Testament believers to claim, right there is the line. I have no reason to regard any of this nonsense about going back to submitting under the yoke of the Torah. Doesn't that sound like a good verse? Okay, let me show you the benefit or the value in regarding studying Hebrew. The law and the prophets were until John. There's one word that I've found that means until. It's spelled Ayin Dalet. There's that word, Ayin, that letter. Ayin Dalet. It means until. If you write Ayin Vav Dalet, again, this is the benefit of the Red Dictionary. It means to say something emphatically, repeatedly, and forcefully. You say, well, why should adding a vav in between the ayin and the dalet mean until, and then to say something repeatedly and forcefully? Well, the thing is about ayin dalet, and again on the chart down here, the Shema is written. Shema is written, Yahweh Elohim, Yahweh Echad, and there's an enlarged ayin and an enlarged dalet, and ayin dalet is circled. The letters ayin dalet, when they're together, you look in the Red Dictionary, and it's a witness, and it's a testimony. It's a testifier. If you're in a court of law and you're called to witness what you saw, you're an ayin dalet. And you give ayin dalet, testimony. In Daniel 12, which is one of the key scripture references for this whole study of this class, Daniel 12:4, it says, hide the words and seal the book until, here's the word ayin dalet, the time, that's spelled ayin tav, the end, which is kuf zadi. Hide the words and seal the book until time, the end. Well, if the benefit of the Red Dictionary is if you look up this word kuf zadi, and it doesn't necessarily mean the end, meaning something doesn't exist any longer. It means when you come to the edge of something, and it stops, and then you go, in between these white and black stripes is a kuf zadi. The end of the white, the beginning of the black. The end of the black, the beginning of the white. It's the end of one thing and something else starting. Hide the word and seal the book, ayin dalet, ayin tav, kuf zadi. But the word ayin dalet, meaning until, also it says in the dictionary, means booty, or something that's been pillaged, or taken by thieves, or pirates, or something that somebody's run off with. And you can say, I think you stole my apple. Prove that I stole your apple. Let me check your pockets. Ha! You've got the apple in your pocket. That's the proof. That's the ayin dalet, is that you've got the apple in your pocket that I'm accused you of stealing. So the witness and the testifier, the evidence of something, is the ayin dalet. So here's another way to read this sentence. If I read the sentence, the law and the prophets were until John, and then they stopped. Does that agree with the Torah that says that these things are for you forever? No, it disagrees. So now I have to assume that Jesus and Paul and Matthew and Luke and a bunch of other guys got together and said, let's Shanghai this thing and make a new religion, and we'll make a lot of money and get a lot of people to think that we're real great. Or you can say, the English that I have seems to sound like that, but maybe there's something missing in translation. What's another way to read it where it would agree with what the Torah said and still be Hebraically correct and still be exactly the same words? The Torah and the prophets were the testimony of John, which validated that he was on truth, on target, and speaking words from Elohim. The Torah and the prophets were John's testimony. Were John's ayin dalet was the only thing he talked about. He was found to be guilty of having those matters in his mouth. The Torah and the prophets were John's ayin dalet. Or were they until John? Now you get to take our pick. Which doctrine do we choose to believe? The one which is in agreement with what the Hebraic Torah says? or the ones which contradict the Hebraic Torah, cancel it, annul it, and say, well, now we have a new religion. Which one do you think Yahweh is behind? I will now go back to mention something I said last week, which I'm not sure the point got across. I said right at the end, you got it, I don't know how clear it was. I mentioned the phrase, Eya Asher Eya, which is translated, I am that I am, or I will be what I will be. And I mentioned, if you look at Aleph, means here's the plan. Picture Aleph as this, just this bullseye. That's the bullseye, that's the center of the bullseye. That's what the plan is. That's the Aleph. And he's going to reveal it exactly in what he made. So that what he made looks exactly like what he planned. So Aleph is paid like the Yod is paid. The Aleph looks just like what he created looks just like. Aleph Hey Yod Hey. It's translated I am, or I will be. I'm suggesting that if you know Hebrew, you could say Aleph Hey, I have planned to reveal myself and my purpose and intention in the creation, how it's revealed. So that one looks like the other. There is nothing disparate. There is nothing disproportionate. One is the exact form and representation of the other. And to make it even more so, he then says the word Asher, Aleph Shin Resh, and the word Aleph Shin Resh is very similar to Yod Shin Resh, which is the word for Israel, which is a straight line. Hey, that looks just like that straight line. And then he says this word again, Aleph, Hey, Yod, Hey. Ayah, Asher, Ayin. And this is another picture of a line. And so you say, well, wait a minute, this is a picture of something with a line, Ayah, Asher, Ayin. And yet the word Ayah itself is a picture of a thing and a line and a thing. And then you look back at the first day of creation. He didn't, we've talked about this before, he didn't say, let there be light, and there was light. What he said was, Yehi or, Va, and, Yehi or. You see, in English we have to change it. Let there be, and there was. He never said, let there be, and there was. What he said was, Yod, Hey, Yod, Va, the word or is in here. Yod, Hey, Yod. See the same pattern? This connected to this. And as I mentioned, what this word means, straight line, also means to authenticate, to confirm, or to validate. It's similar to the word Ayin, Dalet, which is the witness and the testifier that what you have is the truth. What I planned, I then made. What was his plan in looking at those fish and looking at those birds and listening to the Day of Trumpets, like I said at the end of the week last week? What was he thinking? That's not just a rhetorical question. What was he thinking? What was he trying to tell us in these patterns? I've got all kinds of stuff here that we can talk about, but it's all about what was he trying to tell us in these patterns. If he says, I'm going to do something, and I'm going to draw a straight line to that, and then somebody else comes up and says, oh yes, he made a straight line, but he then changed it. He changed it. What part of a straight line between two bullet points that look exactly like them, one to the other, is what he changed? I would maintain, when somebody comes up and says, oh yes, gosh, this is so disturbing. Again, I was listening to something on the radio, and I heard a guy talking about the Ten Commandments, a well-known Christian pastor in Portland. I thought, oh, this ought to be interesting. Let me hear what he has to say about this. He's talking about the first couple, 2, 3 commandments. It's like, yeah, sure sounds good, you know. He made these rules about, not having other deities and this and that. And all of a sudden he comes to the Sabbath day, and I thought, well, this ought to be interesting. Let me hear. Let me pay attention. And he says, by golly, he gave those Israelites the Sabbath day, the seventh day to rest, and that would be the sign that he was their Elohim and they were his people. And the apostles, why they, in order to honor Jesus, they changed it to Sunday, and that's what we do now. Now let's go on to the fifth commandment. It's like, what just happened? A lie, a change, a distortion, a deception. The word adversary means contradictory, is the word shaitan, is the word Satan. When Yeshua says, this is what's going to happen, Peter says, hey, no, man, I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to stand in that way from that going down. And he says, get behind me, Satan. I don't believe he was calling Peter Satan. What he was saying is, listen, step back. Don't be adversarial. I've got an agenda. I've got something I need to do here. For somebody to say that, oh yeah, Yahweh said this to the Israelites, but the Israelites don't have to keep them anymore. That's adversarial. That's satanic. But if somebody were to say, hey, Yahweh, the deity, the Elohim of the Israelites, made a covenant with them, gave them instructions, gave them promises, gave them the threat of a curse and the promise of a blessing, if they would keep it, based on their behavior and on their heart and on their words, would manifest the reality of what he said in their real life, present time, past, present, and future. And then if that preacher, that pastor, comes up and says, but we have no part with that covenant. We have our own covenant. We have a new covenant. We have a new religion. That's where I can draw the line and say, thank you for making it clear. I have nothing to do with your religion, your covenant, and the terms of your contract. It may or may not be true. You may or may not be right. I'm not going to sit here and call you a liar because maybe your Elohim made a deal with you where he changed things. But I read in the scriptures that Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, would not change the terms. And therefore, if you want to be Israel, if you want to be Gabor LaYahweh or Ish Israel, you find out what he said, you take him at his words, and you do it. And what I've found all through here, we could go into many verses where the phrase eyes, or understanding, or look well to, come about. Those are all Ayin concepts. You see, the other thing, you look in the dictionary, you'll see that the word Ayin also means geyser. Something that jumps up. It also means a deep pool. Well, the eyes are the windows of the soul, they say. The deep inner pool. What's in Yahweh's heart? Look in his eye. What did he say about Ayin? Scour the scriptures and look for Ayin concepts. What's a geyser? Water from the deep pools that are memmed that you can't see. They're in mem, they're hidden. They suddenly jump up into the air, and you can see them. You can Ayin them. So if you look at the word Ayin in the dictionary here, the letter Ayin doesn't just mean eyeball. It means something that's given a visual manifestation, something that's seeable. It also has to do with anything that an eye does. It's representative of wisdom, of knowledge, of understanding. How do you make the call? How does the referee make the call? He has to know the instructions. He has to know where the lines are. How are you going to do justly? You've got to know where the lines are. Justice is not a matter for your own heart to determine. Yahweh determined them. And if somebody says, in fact, I have someone who said this to me, when I talked about the fact that these things are eternal, he said, well, God doesn't change, but he changes the rules. And he was saying that the Christian New Testament doctrine was a change of rules. Now again, I don't want to argue with him because I think that the New Testament Christian doctrine is a change of rules. But the question is it valid? Well, maybe it's valid for the Christians. Is it valid for Israel? Now, some people think that the New Testament Christian church is a new Israel, a spiritual Israel. Again, I don't want to argue that point, because when I see in the scriptures, Yahweh talks about Israel being his firstborn, Israel being the apple of his eye, Israel being his betrothed. And as we suggested last week, you've got these different parables. One talks about the bride. One talks about the 10 bridesmaids, 5 of which got in and 5 of which didn't. And then you talk about invited guests that were friends of the bridegroom. And then you've got, since the invited guests didn't want to show up, you've got a bunch of people that he didn't even know that were out on the street that were compelled to come in so that his house would be full. So again, you go back to the picture of the target. You've got the bullseye and you've got these concentric circles. And again, the model is if you flip over a menorah, you see these different circles. And just to throw out for what it's worth, some people say it's not supposed to be round, it's supposed to be squared off. I don't know if it matters. Again, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? You know, it's the same type of question. If you have nothing better to do, there's nothing on TV, you could discuss that with your friends. Anyway, the point is, where do you want to be regarding Yahweh's stuff? Do you want to find excuses to think that his laws don't work? And then you want to get to be one of those crowd that's on Judgment Day when the referee shows up and he says, okay, I'm telling you, I'm separating these guys from those guys, right hand, left hand. Hey, wait a minute. You know, Lord, we did miracles in your name. We did wonders. What are we in this pile for? I never knew you. You were workers of iniquity. And in Greek, the word iniquity is anomio, which means lawlessness. And he wasn't talking about human law. He was talking about Yahweh's law. So that is Torah-lessness. Depart from me, you who disregarded the Torah, never considered it, as you did wonderful works in my name. I never knew you, though you thought you knew me. Though you thought you were doing these works by my Spirit, and by hearing my word in your ear, I never knew you. There's a lot of different verses that we can talk about, as I say. Here's one note. Like Esau, we have despised our own birthright and tossed it away for nothing much, for something that might taste good at the moment, but has no real value. In Revelation 1:20, it talks about, I believe it's 1:20, it's 2:14. Anyway, it talks about Yeshua saying he has something against one of the assemblies, and he says, you've listened to the words or the teachings of Balaam and Balak, and I've mentioned this before. What are the teachings? Oh, they brought in prostitution, harlotry, they brought in false doctrines. But here's the interesting thing. Balaam was trickery. He got them to throw away what was of value. It's like, we were given a line. Yahweh never meant for us to keep this. It was impossible. We can't even if we want to. That old thing, throw away. It's no good anymore. If you keep it, you'll profane the blood of Jesus. You wouldn't want to do that, would you? Just throw away that covenant. And Balak, I mentioned once before that there was an arch-cardinal or somebody from Brazil who a few years ago was invoking the authority of I think it was the United States government to get involved with basically inquisitional actions on anybody who would keep the Sabbath day and defy the Catholic Church, the Vatican rulings. This is modern times. In other words, if Yahweh himself said, here's the terms to Israel, keep my words. How do you know they're my words? Because what I said is exactly what they are. If somebody changes them, they're not my words. Who's your Savior? Yahweh's salvation, Yeshua? If he changed something, he's not Yahweh's salvation, he's somebody else's Savior. If you want Yahweh's salvation, and then somebody else says, if you even touch that stuff, we're going to kill you, we're going to dispossess you, we're going to throw you in jail, we're going to beat you up. He always says, are you going to be intimidated by these guys? I told you, if you stand on the bullseye, if you are the apple of my eye, I will protect you. Now, I can't account for what happened in the past with the Inquisition, with the Holocaust. Why did what happened happen? I don't know. All I know is that Yahweh said, if Israel does not regard the covenant, such things will happen to them. I cannot account for any individual's life or any history of the world why things happen. All I can do is say, we must, for our day, for our age, we can either say the words that say, let's go back and do what Yahweh said, or we can say, like everybody else, just doesn't matter. The other interesting thing about this letter Ayin is where we get the word ocular. It has to do with eyeballs. Well, that has to do with occult. It has to do with that which is visible or invisible. So here's another interesting comparison. If you were to look up about dimensions, if something is one-dimensional, it either exists or it doesn't. Something two-dimensional, It's whether it's on a flat plane, like a line, like drawing on a piece of paper. Three-dimensional, now you add space. Fourth dimension, you have to add some other aspect. It's almost like you're adding, you can add life. We think fourth dimension is time. It's like the sun, moon, and stars. It's almost like the days of creation were laid out. Third dimension, the third day, remember, he spoke plant life. Life is like a whole other dimension. It also goes into reference of space. Fourth dimension, day 4, he put sun, moon, and stars in the sky. Now you got the fifth day. What's the fifth dimension? Spiritual realm, perhaps. The occult versus seeing what Yahweh said. Then what's in the sixth dimension? Well, now you go to the letter Pe. It's like, oh, okay, where am I going with this? Look at Daniel 12. In these positions of the Psalmic Ayin Pe, it lines up with the phrase, the wicked shall do wickedly. The righteous good servant should do righteousness. The antithesis is that the wicked shall do wickedly. The position of the Ayin, the next phrase, has to do with understanding. It says, and none of the wicked shall understand. It's down here on the chart, in the bottom row. We'll have to go back over this at the end of the course. In a few weeks, we'll go back over the chart. None of the wicked will understand. That's in the position of Ayin. They may have knowledge of the occult. They may have awareness of the occult. But if you go back to what Balaam said to Balak regarding Israel, and we talked about this, I believe it was last week, he said, Yahweh had given him an utterance, and he said, because there is no sorcery in Israel, Israel has the blessing. He also said a few other things regarding that. Because there was no occult, false idol worship, and you could say, what is sorcery? We're running out of time, but if you go back through other words that are in the scriptures, what he seems to be talking about is people who devise reading and interpreting knowledge of coming events. The word for Ayin Nun means cloud. It's also the word for sorcery. Why? Because it's something hidden from view, and people who read the clouds say, oh, I think I've got insight to something going on. Or reading tea leaves, or reading tarot cards. That's where the word sorcery comes from. Reading other matters to find out what's going to happen. Compared to reading Yahweh's words to find out what's going to happen. So the people who are into the occult have this eye for the spirit realm, and they might be onto something more than the people who don't acknowledge the Ayin realm, the occult realm, who only deal with the menorah realm, the sun, moon, and stars, which is time and space. You see, some people live without any regard of time and space. They just simply live. That's like the third dimension, day 3, where you throw life in, they're living like plants. They just live. Some people get into the science of time and space, and they figure out the physics and chemistry. Okay, there's stuff there. Other people get into the knowledge of the occult, the Ayin, and the things that are visible, the things that are invisible, the things that are behind what's going on in time and space. But the next thing, remember, he says, the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, because every letter has its antithesis. And the next letter, the Pe, says, but the righteous will understand. Again, what's the message in the pattern? The letter Pe stands to do with the mouth. It's in the position of the altar of incense. It has to do with the prayers of the saints. It lines up with the Beatitude. Remember the psalm? The Beatitude says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. And the next Beatitude, that lines up with the Ayin, has to do with blessed are the merciful, so they will receive mercy. And the next Beatitude lines up with the Pe, that has to do with his words, and it says, blessed are those with a pure heart, for they shall see Elohim. And if you lay this pattern on top of these verses, and then you lay the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. What has this got to do with daily bread? You fill the menorah with oil, and it produces light. You fill the trumpet with breath, it produces sound. You fill the one who hungers and thirsts after righteousness. And then it says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. That lines up with the Ayin. It all has to do with forgiveness. It all has to do with the measure you use will be measured to you. I didn't call the cops on that guy because I decided to work in line with mercy. And so what I realized at the occasion, I did, it's like these things come to you, is that he says, to those who love mercy, when somebody offends you, you now have the opportunity to extend mercy. You see, if they didn't offend you, it wouldn't be mercy. There's the story, I think I told this once before too, a true story. Napoleon had a soldier who did something wrong, he's going to be executed. The mother came up to him and said, please, Napoleon, have mercy. He said, he doesn't deserve mercy. He's a criminal. She said, if he deserved it, it wouldn't be mercy. Napoleon thought about it and said, you're right. Okay, I will grant him mercy. Mercy and justice are two sides of the scale. We can demand justice, and that's right. But to love mercy, to look, to Ayin, for the occasion to exercise mercy, will set us up for the future occasion when we need mercy. And someone says, you don't deserve it. And Yahweh will say, hey, they've already paid into their mercy account. They do deserve mercy. You see, this is a whole different way of thinking. And this has nothing to do with the occult. This has to do with seeing, which is invisible, according to Yahweh's standards. Why? Because of the pay, the mouth, his words, where he says, let me tell you the way it works. None of the wicked will understand. They don't regard the words of Yahweh. Or they think, oh, he changed stuff. We don't know how it works. It's too difficult to understand. But if we look at his language, if we look at his words, he tells us the way things work, and we can bank on it. We can count on it. He said, my people are brilliantly wise when it comes to working wickedness. It's like the banking system, usury. Hey, I'll set this up and it'll be a trap for that guy. I'll catch him and I'll do this. But he says they're fools when it comes to working or crafting righteousness. What does that mean? How do you craft righteousness? If we knew what it means, what I'm giving you is a simple example. He says, my people are foolish when it comes to working righteousness because we don't know and we don't exercise it. But when I saw the occasion to give mercy to a guy that didn't deserve it, but I chose to, is because I was choosing to love the occasion to give mercy, and I took it. It's like, wow, that's like playing a board game and you get a card that's like, oh wow, I can use this in the future. We need to be having our eyes open enough to see these occasions that we can play into it. And so one of the things to do, going through these different words and say, what is buried in there? Here's one in Ecclesiastes 12:11. The words of the wise, that's an Ayin concept. It has to do with wisdom. There's something about an Ayin here. Are like goads. What's a goad? It's like a lamed, which is a thing, the pokey thing, it provokes you. And the nails well driven are the sayings of the master of collections coming from one shepherd. That's convoluted. It makes no sense. But this is Ecclesiastes. This is the collection of the sayings of the wisest of the wise Solomon. Here's an example of tripping over a bump in the carpeting. So to take a little bit of time to work it through, it's a whole other story to sit there and run it all through. Interestingly enough, one of the words here is spelled Aleph Somic Pei Vav Tav. And that's the word for the master of collections. A collection, Aleph Somic Pei. That's the word Aesop. Aesop, that makes me think of Aesop's fables. Does anybody know what Aesop did? He collected all the fables. But the word Aesop in Hebrew means a collection. A collection, a harvest, a gathering, a keeping, or a reaping, an assembly, or a meeting. It's also Aleph Somic Vav Pei, Sufi, with a yod, means a foundling or one taken in, or one that's grafted into the main trunk. The main trunk opens up and it's grafted in. The picture of breaking off one of the arms of the menorah and grafting in a new one is this word Aesop for a collection. The Moedim are also a collection. It's a gathering. It's a harvest. So, just to give you a real quick rundown of what this verse, how I translated it, is this is what it's saying. Decipher the reason of what is stressed and accentuated. What's stressed and accentuated? The Sabbath day and the festivals. It talks about it all the time. And doing justice and mercy to one another. Engage in the activity of perceiving, determining, understanding the tasty flavors of emphasized decrees without wandering astray into error and idolatry. That reads completely different than what Solomon, we're told Solomon said. Did Solomon really say, the words of the wise are like goads, and the nails well driven are the sayings of the master of collections coming from one shepherd? I have no idea what he's talking about. But this simple task of looking at the meanings of the letters and using the dictionary. Imagine Solomon telling his offspring, his descendants, let me tell you something, you guys. Put effort towards deciphering the reason when you find something stressed in the scriptures. Engage in the activity of perceiving, determining, understanding the tasty flavors of the emphasized decrees without wandering astray into error and idolatry. Don't invent a new religion. Don't find a new Elohim. He's given us the pure truth. And if you can taste them, how do you taste them? Words, the mouth, the flavors. Remember the word for finger, as we talked about, the 10 words, the Devarim, were engraved with the fingers of Elohim, but the same word for finger is paint, dye, and color. They're visual flavors. We don't have a taste for Yahweh's stuff because we were told it tastes bad, it was thrown away, spit it out, it'll do you nothing but harm. We were given the words of Balaam and Balak. We were told, this stuff's no good, that's the way, it won't do you any good, and besides that, if you do think of picking it up, I'll stomp on your fingers. Stay away from that. Why? Because I believe, like the tipping scales, they know what's going to happen when Israel picks these words up. What's going to happen? Yahweh's favor, Yahweh's blessing, Yahweh's protection. He says other places that one of these days, and people say, well, in the kingdom, it's when heaven becomes earth, and the new, that what's now a desert will become a garden, what's now a garden will become a forest, which is to say thick with foliage. And what we see, if you hear people talk, it's like, oh, the end is upon us, oh, it's the end of the days, the world's coming to an end. Oh, is it? Well, it's this thing so. For the last 2,000 years they've been saying so. Someone was just telling me the other day that Queen Elizabeth I, when she was on her deathbed, was so sure that the Messiah was going to come back tomorrow, that she said, oh, my crown, I'd give up my kingdom to stay alive one more day. I got to see the resurrection. I got to see the rapture, the return. I got to see. That was 40 years ago. 40 years ago, she thought it was imminent. Why? All the way along, Yahweh's put within us the sense that it's got to be tomorrow. This has got to be the last days. Not necessarily. But it's the last days for somebody. You see, that tower in Daniel chapter 2 hasn't fallen yet. But he says, we've talked about this before, the ebon stone, Aleph, Bet, Nun. Aleph, Bet means father, Bet, Nun means son. But it's not just son, it's also the structure. Aleph, Bet is not just the father, but it is the prime factor, the original plan. The structure of the original intention of Abba manifested by the Son, embedded in the Aleph Bet, and if you Nun it, engage with the Aleph Bet tells you, which is to observe the festivals and the commandments and all these words of Yahweh, it hits the regal, the feet, which is where we get the word regular army soldiers, those who walk, the regulation of the regal authority. See the regal, it's all the same word. Isaac Moses goes into that quite a bit. Regal is customs, habits, and traditions that you walk out. Walk out? Oh, yes. You know, every Sunday, every Christmas, Easter, and Halloween, you walk out the paths that go round and round and round. If we change what we walk out to conform to the pattern of Yahweh's words, is that the stone that will hit the regal of this statue and knock it down and turn it to dust and set up a kingdom that will not yield its sovereignty to another till the end? You see, Kufzadi doesn't mean the end of the world. It simply means the end or the limit of one thing before another thing starts. It's like blowing a whistle, like blowing the shofar. Stop playing. Recalibrate. Yahweh can turn creation around. Yahweh said, He is the one who commands nature. He is the one who can cause something to come back and grow green. He is the one who can speak the word and dry it up and make it wither. He is the one that can bring life to Israel. He breathed life into Adam, dead clay. Do you think he can't breathe life back into this planet and turn it around? Do you think that the men who have tried to ruin this planet by what they did in the Gulf, what they're doing with HARP and with seeding the sky and with all the electromagnetic things and what these stupid companies are doing to the genetics of the seeds, do you think Yahweh can't stop them? What if he's waiting for us to simply do what he said? Oh, what great thing do we have to do? Sit down on the Shabbat, acknowledge his festivals, learn his words, give him kavod, give him praise. The phrase, Hodu la Yahweh ki tov, ki le'olam chasdo. Give thanks unto Yahweh, for he is good. For his chesed, his mercy, his kindness endures forever. His mercy and kindness endures forever. He doesn't want to see this place trashed by a bunch of jerks. He wants to see his people doing righteousness. The point of this talk is that the Ayin has to do with the bullseye. The Ayin has to do with what are we looking at. We, right at the end here, we had this week of where we talked about the noons. The letter noon, red shirt with these yellow lightning bolts. They're like letter noons. What's in between the inverted noons? We went through this whole thing where it says, arise, Yahweh. Let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee from before your face. How does Yahweh arise? Well, let's just sit here and wait for Yahweh to arise. Picture the teeter-totter. Remember, if you sit down, he rises up. Gee, could it be as simple as that? You see, it doesn't matter if you go to church on Sunday, or on Wednesday, or on Monday night, or anything. It doesn't matter. He said, don't work the Shabbat. You, your son, and your daughter. Your manservant, your maidservant, your animals, your cows, and the stranger within your gates. You don't hire a stranger to come and do your dirty work for you on Shabbat. Don't work on Shabbat. You sit down, will that raise him up? And then he says the other part of the inverted noon was, come Yahweh, abide tranquilly amidst the myriad thousands of Israel. But the other way to translate that is Yahweh increase the prestige of Israel. Like Rababet, multiply Rababet, the word is Rabavot. The Alfi, thousands, is also the learning of Hebrew, which is Alpine, which is the highest and best. The idea is that if we look through all the words for Ayin, which we don't have time for here, one of the things we want to do, just for what it's worth, after this course is over, is if I can, to write up various different things that I've studied and make them available and have them available on the internet. Just don't have the time. I don't have the time to talk about them all. But if you sit here and look for anything where he talks about wisdom, the book of Proverbs, the book of Ecclesiastes, find out what is the matter. Yeshua said, if you abide in me and my words abide in you. He's talking about the life of the words. If you go back to the pattern with the, it's not going to go anymore, the Kaf and Lamed, that's where the words are written. Abiding, or having the words abiding in you, is memming. What he's promising is nooning from the mem that you're nurturing, that you're fostering the development of. So if you understand these, you go, the next thing he's going to say has something to do with Samakai and Pei. So you've got the fall feast in Samakai and Pei Zadi. And you've got the spring feast in Pesach, Chamatzot, and Shavuot. I was talking to a guy earlier today, yesterday, about another matter. He said, was it in Exodus 30 or something? He was talking about tying these things on your hand and as far as between your eyes. The word ayin there, if you look in the dictionary, the word ayin has to do with a visual aspect. The word ayin lamed means on. But if you look in the dictionary, it doesn't just mean on. It means above, at, beside, because of, on account of, concerning, in reference to. And if you look at the word hand, which is yod, dalet, and there's a kaf, your yod, dalet, your hand, you could say it. It has to do with being. I think the word is hey, yod, hey. It will be an oat. Lamed, aleph, vav, tav. Well, an oat is a sign or symbol, but it's also an alphabetic letter. That it will be like on your hand. But if this doesn't say on, it all depends on how you translate it. In reference to your hand, well, the word yodelet, if you look in the Red Dictionary, can also mean arm, hand, foreleg, monument, pillar, power, strength. What if it means, iron can also mean a yoke. You could put, it's like, what are you supposed to tie on your monument? It's a visual aspect like the alphabetic letters regarding a token of recognizing your strength. It's talking about eating unleavened bread for a week. It says, eat unleavened bread for a week. Don't let any leavening be found in your house or anywhere in your gates for a week. And when your children ask you, why are you doing this? Tell them the story of your exodus. With a strong hand, Yahweh took us out of Egypt to make us his own possession. He took us to the mountain. He gave us this brit, this betrothal, this ketubah, this writing of covenant of marriage between Yahweh and Israel. And he told us, eat unleavened bread. And as you're explaining this to your children, the Torah will be in your mouth. As you're eating unleavened bread and explaining why you're eating unleavened bread, the Torah will be in your mouth. And it itself will be a visual regard of something that would otherwise be hidden. It will spring up like a geyser and be this visual manifestation. See, the oat, every letter of the alphabet, also known as oath, is exactly the promise that Yahweh gave. If you are my people, I will do this. But because you're my people, if you don't do this, I'm going to do that. Give your enemies jurisdiction over you. So as you keep this festival, it's a visual, like a geyser, jumping up and saying, I'm one of them. I'm one of Yahweh's people. I'm Israel. See, I'm doing what he said. And it's yoked to your power, your strength. What's your strength? Yahweh's our strength. But Yahweh said, your strength is for you to sit down and me to whoop your enemies for you. Your strength is to sit down and keep the Shabbat and the festivals while I make nature cooperate on your behalf and bring forth food, bring forth rain in its season, and make all the wild beasts and insects cooperate to bless you abundantly. And to keep the eating of unleavened bread is the yoke of your strength. But if you think of it as, oh, we should do the phylacteries and tefillin and wrap this thing around our arm because that's what he's talking about, you can do that if you want. I don't see it as a commandment. It's all how you translate the words. Is he making burdensome things for us to do? Or is he telling us the way it really works? How did he create the universe? The benefit of us knowing having a relationship with the Creator, knowing him, is that he's the Creator. He told us the way it works. This is the way it works. Ayin. It scales. What you put in is what's going to be measured. It's like a seesaw. If you sit down, this goes up. If you stand up, this goes down. You regard my covenant, you get blessed. You don't regard my covenant, you get cursed. You want your enemies to be put down? Do what I say. As we talked about in Daniel 2, I mentioned this the other week, this stone hits the feet. It says in English, it's carved out of the mountain, not with human hands. But I look at it and I don't see the word mountain, and the other way to translate that is the segmented or segmenting stone. They translate it carved out for hewn. But what is segmented, which does any job of segmenting? The alphabet. I'm using the Ayin. I'm trying to apply some wisdom. I'm trying to apply some discernment of what do these words mean and how do they work. It's putting together a puzzle. This whole language is a puzzle. And I'm not saying that I've got the whole deal. I'm trying to show us we've got a puzzle. I'm trying to show us there's some good stuff in here. I'm trying to show us that the very thing that other people are getting upset about, I told you once before that I heard a story on the internet where a pastor was saying that he was going to teach his church Hebrew, and another pastor, an elder pastor, got mad at him and told him not to do that he was wasting everybody's time. Sounds like Balaam and Balak to me. These are Yeshua's words. These are Yahweh's words. These are the words and letters which have woven the fabric of the universe. There are animals, bacteria, small-celled things that live in like 400, 500 degree Fahrenheit lava pouring out of the ocean floor. And they live there. They like it. That's their environment. Yahweh can do anything he wants. He can change anything he wants. He can remake anything he wants. What he wants is our cooperation. The purpose of this class, once again, is to give us wisdom by regarding Yahweh's words. And if somebody says the words were changed, the rules were changed, don't count on it. Because if you go ahead and behave as if the rules were changed, and the referee comes and says, you fouled out, because, yeah, but they said, he says, were you so easily tricked? Were you so easily deceived? Did you so willingly throw away your greatest treasure, which is the words of explanation from the Creator of the universe himself, given to his special, most prized, treasured betrothed, Israel? You think he'd lie to us? You think he'd deceive us? You think he'd trick us? No. He said lies, deceit, and trickery would come when we threw away his own words. Every letter of this alphabet, which is why we're doing this class, is to try to do a couple things. And then we're at the end. Yeshua said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Think about that for a minute. He's the way. You can either believe that or not. But if you do choose to believe it, if you don't believe it, it stops right there. But if you do choose to believe it, then what's the next thing? Okay, I believe he's the way. Where's the way? He's the truth. Well, you could say, well, is he lying to me or is this the truth? You can either believe it or not. If he's lying to you, it stops right there. But if it is the truth, now you have to say, how do I do it? When he says he's the life, you can either believe it or not. But what's the life? How do you get the life? How do you appropriate the life? By truly, accurately doing what he said was the right way. And you won't get it in English, Latin, or Greek, or even probably Aramaic, because Aramaic is kind of like a slang. Ladino is a blend of Spanish and Hebrew. Yiddish is a blend of German and Hebrew, but only Hebrew is Hebrew. And only Hebrew uses these 22 letters, and if you know what these 22 letters mean, it seems to me everything we need to turn this whole thing around is right in here. And even if, let me just put this disclaimer, even if for some reason we're wrong and the end is upon us, I would rather stand in front of the Almighty, the Judge, on Judgment Day and say, I just took it your word. Rather than say, I thought you were kidding. I thought you changed it. They told me you changed it. And if he says, what did I say? Do we know what he said? Can we read his words?